that they had torn down the abomination that had been erected on the altar in Jerusalem, and that they had surrounded the sanctuary on high walls as before. You know what I told you? What I tell you? They had torn down the abomination that he had erected on the altar in Jerusalem, and that they had surrounded the sanctuary with high walls as before. Can't miss this. This is really important stuff that we should have gotten when we were in Sunday school, right? So when you see the desolating sacrifice standing in the holy place, as was spoken of by the prophet Daniel, again, that's a relation to this because they fixed it. Yes, sir?
Are we saying here that the Gentiles are the pagans?
Yeah. Yeah, Gentiles are pagans.
We're talking about two different groups. Jews were the only religious people. Everybody else was pagan. Is that right?
Oh, pagans are very religious. I don't know if I have time to go through the train of things, but you have basically, you have 4 levels of religion in evolution of religion. You start with animism, which we would call paganism. You also have pantheonic paganism, which we also call paganism. Animism is where you worship everything. Pantheonic paganism is where you have a pantheon, like Zeus and all those other guys. Then you go to Mysterium and Gnosticism. The world's moving to Mysterium right now. When we say Gentiles or pagans, I'm talking about the people that are not the Jews. And the reason I use that term is because, well, most people understand what a pagan is. We don't think of ourselves as one, but I guess we all are to a degree. We are really Gentiles because unless, you don't have to raise your hand, but unless you're Jewish, you're considered a Gentile, right?
So you're a pagan.
So you are a pagan because there are no Christians in this time, right? So I guess we could divide them into animist, Mysterion, and pantheonic pagans. Take your pick. But really what you have is you have the Jews, and really the Jews have divided into 3 sects. And those sects radically believe different things, right? The Pharisees believe in the resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees don't. The Essenes believe in the resurrection of the dead. The Pharisees hold to the Mishnah and the Talmudic documents. Well, they're not documents yet. They haven't been written down. The Essenes ignore them, but have their other documents. And likewise, the Torah is the main thing to the Sadducees and to the Essenes. So, the world is different. The world is different than we imagine. Yes, sir?
Wouldn't the Sadducees be considered the liberals compared to the Pharisees?
Actually, no, and that's a neat question. The Sadduceic school actually was more the Sadduceic school was less liberation because they insisted that the Torah be held, whatever the Torah said, that they hold to it. So if the Torah said to stone an adulterous woman or stone an adulterous man, the Sadducees were known for holding to the letter of the law. So whenever you see them whenever Christ talks about the letter of the law, he's talking about a Sadduceic viewpoint, which by the way, he always talks about law about the same time. The Pharisees, on the other hand, wanted to be more liberal in the punishments especially. And so they were considered the more liberal of the group. But we don't get that impression, do we?
No. It's the other way around to me.
In our mind, we think it's the opposite. But it's only because, well, we don't really know what the Pharisees and Sadducees are to begin with.
Yeah.
We read about, that's what I always say. When, I'm the kind of person, I always made my teachers really mad at me. Because when they said, well, we're going to talk about the Pharisees, I'd say, well, who are they? And they'd say, well, just, they're the Pharisees. I'm like, no, who are they, right? And, unless you understand that the Pharisees came out of this Maccabean period and why they existed, then it's hard to understand about them. But if you understand that the Sadducees held directly to the Torah and to all the Torah punishments, and that the Pharisees were rather holding to the Mishnah and to the Talmudic arguments around the Mishnah, then you can see that they would, the people actually were more popular, the Pharisees were more popular with the people. Plus the Pharisees were the rabbis. So they were teaching the people in the synagogues. So, we get the impression the Pharisees are some kind of class of people that no one likes. But Paul was a Pharisee. Never was not. And was Paul held in esteem by the people? Yeah, for a long time until he became part of Teen Hodos for Christianity, right? And then he got in real trouble. So, great questions.
The thing about the Sadducees not believing in the resurrection
Yeah.
That confused me because it made me think that they were relatively unbelievers.
Well, they would consider this, as a matter of fact, Orthodox Jews today, if you're really Orthodox, you don't believe in the resurrection.
Yeah.
You go to Gehenna, which literally means the place under the earth, the valley of Hena, the son of Hena. So, not a very good place to go to. I don't know, give me a choice, Paris. That's why the Mysterion was, you know, the Christianity said, hey, you go to heaven. And the Mysterion was saying, hey, you go to heaven too. But Christianity said, we'll tell you the mystery right away. You don't have to wait. Where in the Mysterions, you had to, you know, keep reaching until you got to the right level. And then when you're at the right level, you got the mystery. And Christianity said, hey, Christ is risen, Christ is dead, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. That's the mystery of faith. And everybody said, yeah, you know. I mean, this is really neat because you don't want, you know, the Jewish worldview for the Sadducees was not very positive. And the Jewish worldview from the Pharisees' standpoint wasn't very positive because you got to follow all these rules, right? And if you follow the rules and do it right, and you go to Jerusalem 3 times a year, and you sacrifice, then maybe you'll get to heaven. See? So when Christianity came out and said, hey, don't worry about that stuff. Boy, what a change in the world. So that's a whole nother place. We kind of looked at that in the Acts class. In any case, let's see. There's a lot of good stuff. I'll put this up on my website eventually when I have time. But, you know, in any case. Second Maccabees is an abbreviated version of a 5-volume historical work by Jason of Cyrene that's lost. It's lost. You can find it. It'd be great. It'd be worth millions. It's not a sequel to the First Maccabees, but a different account of many of the same events related in that book down to about 161 BC, combined with some legendary additions. The writer's interests are religious rather than historical. D-rash, right? He uses the history as a backdrop to advance religious ideas current among the Jews of Alexandria during the 1st century. So remember I mentioned before, you know, these books in the Apocrypha kind of give you this view of the world from a different worldview than you're used to. So, you know, most of our worldview is kind of a worldview from the, you know, the school of the Galileo, and you didn't know this, but the school of Galileo and the school of Jerusalem. Well, this is about the school of Alexandria. And guess who was from the school of Alexandria that's really important in the New Testament? The guy we think might have written Hebrews? Paul's friend. Apollos. Apollos came from Alexandria, remember? We think Apollos probably wrote Hebrews. Because Paul is kind of tenuous. But Apollos, and by the way, Hebrews reflects a lot of the stuff from that. And by the way, the Hebrews quote about the righteousness of Abraham came from Maccabees. And the Maccabean documents, 3 of them were written in Alexandria. In any case, the work of an Alexandrian Jew about 124 BC parallels 1 Maccabees 110 to 750. Some of them support the Roman Catholic teachings on purgatory, prayers for the dead, and the intercessory work of the glorified saints. If you ever wondered where those ideas came from, they're not in the Old Testament. They're not really in the New Testament. They're right there. We found this, right? A lot of our views on the world have come from the apocryphal documents. We just didn't know. The reason rabbis would not like 2 Maccabees, it is a Greek abbreviation of likely a Greek text. You know they didn't like that Greek stuff because those Teen Hodos Christian guys were using it. The Hebrew style document in Greek. That's interesting. Remember, we've seen a lot of Greek style documents in Hebrew. This is a Hebrew style document in Greek. The Maccabees made treaties with the Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians. They did it here too. So that wouldn't be very popular. It again clearly states that 2 of the Maccabees were both high priests and kings. They weren't of the lineage of Aaron or David. It's got life after death and prayers for the dead as strong themes. So automatically, what would the Sadducees do? They'd say we don't want it. See? So if you get a bunch of rabbis, remember the Sanhedrin 70 4 of them were Pharisees, and the rest were Sadducees. We don't know what the split was later in the century, but we're talking around the time of Christ. So the winners of this would probably be the Sadducees, if you had a big fight. Maybe they did. That would be kind of cool, right? Issues with Second Maccabees. There's lots of historical issues, but they're not stated obviously. Remember, when you have a historical issue and you state it obviously, you're trying to point the reader that this is fiction. But if you have historical problems, that means you're intending it to be read as factual. So it's probably legendary. A little bit of difference between the two. We would probably say not much, but in the ancient world they did think there was a big difference between the two. In other words, this is trying to be a derash point of view with a historical overdrop, intentionally. But remember, it's a Greek document with a Hebrew style. So you might expect that. It's intended to be history in the style of Herodotus, but obviously borrows from legendary sources. The majority of the historical anomalies are in the work are obvious accidents or otherwise undocumented events. So we're not sure how much is legendary, for example, there's an account there, I can get into a little detail on this. The temple fire, the fire for the altar, the temple fire, in pagan world and in the Jewish world, the temple fire was never supposed to go out. But yet, the fire on the temple in the Hebrew thought it didn't go out, but it was removed from the altar once a year, kept safe, and then returned to the altar. That's during Yom Kippur. So what happened though is during the period in which the temple was attacked and taken over, what happened to the altar fire? Was put out. And also they brought a temple fire to Zeus. So they brought the pagan fire, see, from Greece to put on that temple, or wherever they brought it from. But probably from Greece, from Mount Olympus. Because every year in Mount Olympus, you had to rewrite all the fires in the temples and relight all the house fires too. Because your hearth fire had to be lit from Mount Olympus. That was the rule in Greek culture. So in Hebrew culture, they didn't worry so much about the fires in the houses, but the fires in the temple had to be right. So basically there's a legendary account how the temple fire was taken, I think by Daniel, to Babylon and hidden away, and then was miraculously brought back as pitch, that when they put it on the altar, the pitch just started on fire. So a legendary account. We have no other accounts that affiliate, and it's a miracle, a miraculous account. You can accept it as you would accept a New Testament miracle, or you can, that's what they call legendary. There are none of those kind of miraculous accounts in First Maccabees as a comparison. And, that's the thing, Peshat, Derash versus Peshat. These are quotes. I'm just going to skip by them. There's some really long ones here. By the way, there are some direct quotes about some of the tortures and attacks and stuff in it. Also, there's a parallel to what happened to remember Paul being struck from the horse. There's a parallel to that in 2nd Maccabees that could have been a, I'm not saying it's copied account, but it's just, it's not a, what happened to Paul was historically a viable account. It's just that we think that what happened to Paul was absolutely unique in Jewish history, but it's not absolutely unique in Jewish history. Such accounts of things happened before in the Apocryphal period and written down in Maccabees. So to an ancient world person, when they heard the account of Paul, they would be surprised that it occurred, but it wouldn't be so surprising to them that such a miracle had happened. Do you see my point? But to us, it appears like a unique thing. So it's an interesting thing for us to compare. 3rd Maccabees, found in most Orthodox Bibles, is part of the, and I don't know if I can even pronounce this. This is Anagenox. That's the works that are good for knowledge as opposed to canonical, but it's good to read. The Protestants and Catholics consider it non-canonical except the Moravian brethren. Moravian brethren, I don't know who the Moravian